Hey guys, it's KJ from the Scariest Movie Ever channel on YouTube. I have a lot to unpack in this video. This has to do with a subject I've been looking into for many years. There's been an interesting narrative I've seen develop specifically over the last year or so. And this has to do with the idea of UFOs. We've seen this cross over into the mainstream in a really big way. I've been talking about this coming alien invasion for many years myself, but I have a bit of a different take on it from what the mainstream narrative is. So first, let's take a look at how this subject, which was considered a fringe subject for many years, is suddenly becoming mainstream headlines. So here's a little bit from the article, and this article comes to us from Vanity Fair. It doesn't get much more mainstream than Vanity Fair. But it reads, in 2004, two Navy pilots near San Diego encountered what they said was a strange aircraft, whitish in color, oval in shape, and capable of accelerating like nothing I've ever seen, one of the pilots would later tell the New York Times. I have no idea what I saw, the pilot said. That alleged encounter was among the incidents examined by a secret Pentagon program investigating unidentified flying objects, which was established in 2007 at the behest of then-Senator Harry Reid, and revealed in a bombshell Times report 10 years later. The revelation of a $22 million intelligence program aimed at investigating UFOs was stunning enough, but interest among lawmakers has only seemed to grow since the now-shuttered Pentagon program was revealed, suggesting that the possibility of alien encounters is something the United States government is taking seriously. Here's another headline, and this is from Politico.com, once again considered a mainstream source of information. And you can look this story up online and you'll see pretty much every mainstream publication has talked about this. Senators get classified briefing on UFO sightings. And this is from less than a week ago. 3 more U.S. senators received a classified Pentagon briefing on Wednesday about a series of reported encounters by the Navy with unidentified aircraft, according to congressional and military officials. And this is the important part, it's part of a growing number of requests from members of key oversight committees. So when I talk about narratives, I look at trends like this. And again, this subject is really trending. This story was just a few days apart from the last news story we looked at on UFOs. During an interview on ABC News, the president actually discussed UFOs briefly. So continuing with the narrative, here's a story from June 23rd, just a couple of days ago. 57 UFO sightings reported in Georgia during 2019 so far. So here's another example of what I was talking about, and this is just from a few days ago. But Joe Rogan did an interview of a man named Bob Lazar. So here's a little bit about Bob Lazar. It reads, a totally surprising and totally enthralling interview with one of the most amazing UFO witnesses of all time. Bob Lazar has just aired on the Joe Rogan Experience. Documentarian Jeremy Corbell recently brought Lazar back into the mainstream with his film Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers, which is available on Netflix right now. Again, another example of how this narrative is being pushed even more and more. Lazar claims to have worked at Area 51 in the 1980s. He was tasked with back engineering alien technology, specifically a small reactor with the power of anti-gravity. He also witnessed a test flight of a spaceship and glimpsed into a large room that sheltered several other spacecraft, all of different shapes. Lazar also claimed to have read government briefings about these craft and the alien presence on Earth. In one briefing, it was revealed to him that the technology he was experimenting on originated from Zeta Reticuli star system. So if you look into Bob Lazar, you'll find a lot of his claims people have debunked or believe they've debunked. And to me, this isn't even really about Lazar. I'm mainly trying to show you the narrative of how this is coming into the mainstream a lot more. We're seeing a lot more about this alien stuff, the UFO stuff. We're seeing more and more news and interviews and stories and, again, mainstream press covering UFOs and aliens. Now, I believe a lot of this is a setup for a so-called alien invasion. There's a few different schools of thoughts on this. Some people believe it's going to be Project Bluebeam, and others believe that these are going to be real entities that arrive. I tend to believe that some of these so-called UFOs are actual entities. I've covered this subject for years on the channel. I've shown you lots of examples of these particular UFOs. They're shape-shifting light energy beings. Some people believe they're the Watchers from Enoch. Some think that they're heavenly angels. But I tend to believe more on the side of Project Bluebeam, possibly working in conjunction with an actual arrival of these entities, pretending to be beings from another planet. Speaking of which, let's take a look at this very paragraph at the bottom, Zeta Reticuli star system. So here's where we're starting to get a deeper understanding of this narrative. Bob Lazar mentioned the Zeta Reticuli system. And if you look into it, there's a lot of researchers out there that talk about the Zetas. It's these aliens that come from that particular system. Most of us are familiar with this type of an alien. They call them Greys. So you can do some research and you'll find tons of people have had experiences with these Grey aliens. So this is from the website CarolynandLauren.com. It's from a few women who've actually claimed to have had experiences with these beings. So I want to read some of this with you guys because the view these ladies take on what these beings actually are is very close to my view as well. On Zetas and alien races, they write, according to some artistic renderings of what Zetas look like, they remind both of us of a particular being that we both met, who was the leader of the larger group of what many call the Greys. Whether or not he called himself a Zeta or not, we have no idea, but he looks similar. However, the major thing we would like to point out is that any so-called alien races are simply demonic beings that have been disguised in various ways. That said, there are many diverse reactions when people talk about so-called aliens. One, of course, is to disbelieve. The second is to be frightened of them, and the third is to glorify them and any experiences with them. And all three reactions are wrong. First, just because we don't personally see or experience something doesn't mean it's not real. And related to this thought, just because something is real does not mean it comes from the true God and is scripturally sound. Quote, alien or demonic encounters, while real, are not endorsed by Scripture and they are not authorized by the true God. Second, there is no reason to be afraid of, quote, aliens. They are only demons or fallen angels. If you have submitted yourself to the Father, you are under the authority of Christ, and you can tell them to leave, and they have to leave. Third, these types of encounters are not anything to brag about or to be proud of, and there's no reason to look to people who have had experiences with these types of demons as being people who are somehow, quote, super special and cool because they've had encounters with demons. So what? Who cares? There's nothing, quote, special about having so-called alien encounters. And then there's this part. Satan's overall plan is to lead people into deception by bringing all religions into one New Age Luciferian spirituality, whereby people are open to the supernatural and to the influence of the fallen, allowing them full access to people. This is paving the way for his final Antichrist to appear. He accomplishes this overall goal by using infiltrators, both conscious and unconscious, and in the physical as well as in the supernatural, to spread this universal spirituality. The ultimate goal of the infiltrators are to train people through occult doctrines and techniques to come into agreement with and enter into a false unity, also known as Christ consciousness, thinning the veil between the spirit world and the physical world, thereby paving the way for the false Christ. One of the most powerful tools of propaganda, of course, is the film and television industry. And time again on my channel, I show you how real life is reflected in film. And this is because movies and television shows are programming us. So of course a few years ago they made a movie about one of these Zetas, or Greys. The movie was called Paul. So this film was filled with satanic symbolism. And the whole movie was about how the discovery of Paul, this Zeta, this Grey alien, would destroy religions, specifically Christianity in this case. I've come to where I call these symbols of the beast system. But even right here on the guy in the center of the screen, on his t-shirt, he's got two of the symbols together. He has the lightning bolt inside the ring of Saturn. And for those people that have seen this before and understand this, then you already know these are two very common symbols of the beast system. Also symbols of Lucifer, or Satan. In the film, Kristen Wiig, the actress, the lady pictured right here, plays a Christian. You can see she has the cross around her neck and, of course, a really crude message on her shirt. Evolve this, it says. And of course it's a picture of Messiah taking the life of Darwin in a very violent way. Also notice the one-eye symbolism, pretty obvious, right? So again, we have the all-seeing eye symbolism. But most importantly, I believe her story is the main story in this entire film. She starts off playing the stereotype of a Christian in most Hollywood films. Dumb, kind of naive. But once she meets Paul, it completely destroys her faith. And for the rest of the film, she's boozing it up, having a good time, doing whatever feels right, because she no longer has faith. With the symbolism here of the beast system, and also understanding that that whole idea, I believe, is part of this narrative, it all fits. It makes sense. This system has been pushing this narrative for quite a while, and once again, it really is heating up right now. And speaking of predictive programming in films, specifically with this alien narrative, we can go back to Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And I think it's beyond coincidence that in this film, the alien saviors actually landed at the Devil's Tower National Monument. Another example comes to us from the sci-fi miniseries Childhood's End, which was based on a novel by Arthur C. Clarke. The movie is all about alien visitors. Now, at the end of the series, at the end of the book, these aliens are revealed to actually be demons, or the devil himself. Here's another interesting example of the symbolism, how it all connects, and this is showing us, once again, the manifestation of this beast system. Right here at the end of the series, when this demon or devil comes out, he's holding hands with two children, a little boy and a little girl. By now, most of you are familiar with this statue. Years after the Childhood's End sci-fi series, we find the Satanic Temple here in America creating these statues with the Baphomet, a figure of Satan, surrounded on his sides by two children, a little boy and a little girl. So I recently saw a new film called Captive State. And this is yet another example of that predictive programming for the alien invasion. And in this film, we find that common theme once again, that once the aliens have arrived, there's a worldwide unity. Everybody celebrates this. So there's another common theme that we find in all these types of movies, like movies in the future, dystopian futures, or when the aliens come, and that is that everybody is chipped. So of course, once again, we find that theme in this film as well. Everybody has a microchip in them. So of course we find another one of these narratives that play out in all of these movies, TV shows, and even ideologies. This sequence takes place inside of an abandoned church, and you can see right there on the wall, it says, "All prayer strictly forbidden." Once again, we see this idea time and time again that once the alien saviors arrive, there'll be no more need for religion or faith. So this idea is confirmed in the film later on, where we find this character here, this female, and she's wearing a cross around her neck. This is a team of people who are about to meet the aliens. So during the sequence, a man enters the room, he sees the cross around her neck, and he says, "Take that off. You might as well be wearing a target." So once again, we're seeing kind of this end game play out more and more. Ultimately, what this is all about, my belief, is the end of Christianity, the end of faith. There's a sequence in the film where a high school band reenacts first contact with the alien saviors. At one point during this whole sequence, a lady comes out and starts singing all about how they found the light. This is more of these occult references to Luciferianism. And as we get a wider shot of this celebration, you find that it's all taking place on a giant pentagram. I know you may say it's just a star, but we have to take things in context. This film, like so many other movies and TV shows before it, show us a direct connection between Luciferianism, or the devil himself, and the alien saviors. You may remember from just a few years ago there was a comet they said that was approaching the Earth called Alma Mooa, and it's actually Hawaiian for the messenger. So again, this story is another example of how they enter this into our consciousness. They imprint us with the idea that there's messengers or a messenger coming from space. Some of you may remember this story. It went worldwide, made mainstream news all around, and it came out just a few years ago. Everybody was wondering why these people are touching this glowing orb of the Earth. And whether there's a direct connection or not, it is interesting that it's a glowing orb. because the orbs are a very specific type of UFO, of course, and I've detailed these throughout the years. I believe that these are interdimensional beings, demonic energy spirits. Some people believe they may be the actual fallen angels themselves, just shape-shifting. So on that note, I want to show you just a few brief clips of some of the most recent sightings of these orbs, and then show you a little clip afterwards. After years and years of watching all kinds of UFO footage, when it comes to these orbs, sometimes they operate in a very specific way. Time and time again, you'll find them coming in threes. Oftentimes, they'll form a perfect pyramid. Also, you'll see these light orbs shape-shifting and changing colors. So check this out, and I'll be back in a little bit.
Check out this video from one of our viewers, Mashatai. He said he woke up at about 2:30 this morning, get a drink of water, and this is what he saw in the sky. Certainly caught his eye. He took the video from Kaka'ako and thinks the lights were over Central or West Oahu, hard to tell from his vantage point. As you can see, the two bright lights, and then slowly a third light appears.
And then you've really got to wonder, why is the nature of it so deceptive? You know, if they're really here to help us, as some of these contacts claim, you know, why do they go around acting deceptively? Why do they stealthily abduct people in the middle of the night? And, you know, when I say it was confronting, there was some subject matter that was particularly disturbing. You know, people claim they've been taken onto a spaceship and probed in all parts of their bodies. There are sexual encounters. There seems to be some sort of almost ritual abuse that's going on. So you've got to ask, why would advanced, you know, evolved creatures, you know, kidnap people in the middle of the night and do these horrible things to them, and yet say, you know, we're here to help you evolve. And it's interesting that, you know, we'd like to apply, if you like, a scientific tag to it. But quite simply, it seems that these creatures claim that they fly millions of light years across the universe to basically deny the Bible, Christianity, and teach us almost New Age beliefs. Why would advanced extraterrestrials come just to teach us religious messages? And it seems to me, and again the researchers will show you, that the messages being received are deceptive in nature. They will tell you things like, well, you know, we've come from Venus or Mars. In the 60s, that was the messages. Well, we now know that's impossible. Now they say they come from Sirius or Orion or Zeta Reticuli or somewhere far off, where we can't test those claims. And that's the problem. And some of the stories they've told us, like that, we know to be demonstrably not true. And if someone comes to you, Chris, and tells you a story and does all these things and says, I'm here to help you, but then does brutal things to you and then lies to you, then I don't think trust is a good place to start.
Yeah, we've all been educated. And when it comes to this area of science, the education is not neutral. We're taught within a certain framework. Let me give you another quote that explains this. Scott Todd from Kansas State University, evolutionary professor. He says, even if all the data should point to an intelligent designer, such an hypothesis is excluded from science because it's not naturalistic. So in essence, they're defining what they think science is. Now to me, to you probably think, well, science surely is about inquiry, investigation, wherever it may lead. But they're saying, if that inquiry or investigation leads to an intelligent designer, possibly the God of the Bible, then hang on, that's not science. You know, that's religion. See, but actually they have their own religious view because a priori they've already excluded the idea that God can play. He's not allowed in the classroom. He's excluded purely on a philosophical or religious basis.
Well, I was going to say, this sounds at least a hybrid of science and philosophy.
It is.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, some of them have been candid enough to admit that. And science actually originally started out as a branch of philosophy. If we look back, you know, a few hundred years even, you know, the early Greeks were actually really philosophers, but they had some scientific ideas that they brought along with that. Paul was dealing with that when he went to Athens in Acts 17. You know, the Stoics and the philosophers were there, and, you know, they were the early evolutionists, if you like. They thought that man must have sprung up out of the ground somehow, maybe many millennia before or something like that. So they've always been interconnected, see, because we have a worldview with which we approach the subject matter. And I like to point out, you know, all of us as adults, or once we reach the age of understanding, we develop a worldview for ourselves. Our worldview is primarily made up, I believe, by one major issue, and that is where you think you came from. Now, this actually also ties into the subject matter, because although they're saying, you know, we won't allow an intelligent designer, isn't it interesting that increasingly science is moving towards design, but they're quite happy for the aliens to be the designers?
Well, I mean, aren't some high-profile, unnamed at this point, atheists actually tending in that direction, saying that the Earth was somehow seeded by aliens?
Yeah, well, Francis Crick, who won a Nobel Prize for Science, he and his colleague James Watson, they discovered the DNA molecule in 1953. Crick was an ardent atheist. In fact, he said one of the reasons he entered the sciences was to disprove the notion. You know, he was a materialist. But in a book called Life Itself, he said, you know, armed with all the knowledge available to us now, when they're looking at the DNA code, he said, it almost looks like looking at a miracle. So many are the conditions which would have to have been satisfied to get it going. But he didn't believe in miracles. So would you believe 50 years ago, Crick postulated the idea of panspermia, seeds from space, that maybe aliens come here and seeded life. Because what we know about science today and natural selection, it shows that the information that happens in nature causes the genetic information to go in the wrong direction, so it doesn't solve the answer.
It causes one's head to shake a bit to think that some of these high-profile, well-educated atheists believe that aliens have given us life.
So here's an interesting case that most of you've probably never heard of, but it shows an interesting connection between space objects and the paranormal. After a 1974 brush fire all but destroyed Antoine and Jerry Betts' woodland property in Fort George Island, Florida, they were devastated. As they began the process of sifting through the debris, they came across a strange metal sphere they'd never seen before. The Bettses initially believed the sphere to be a leftover cannonball from a battle fought in the area several decades prior. Nevertheless, they were intrigued by its origins. It had a strange triangle etched into it, again the pyramid, weighed about 22 pounds and measured the same size as a bowling ball. One morning, just a few weeks after the Betts family's discovery, their son Terry was playing guitar in the same room as the sphere. Suddenly, it began to react to the sound of his playing, resulting in a throbbing noise that spooked the family dog. After this, the Betts family began to wonder if the sphere was alien in nature or even just some sort of advanced technology. They suspected it had been dropped from a NASA spacecraft orbiting the Earth. Things grew even more odd when one day, while seated on the floor, they attempted to roll the strange sphere to one another. According to the family, whenever someone sent it in one direction, it would suddenly change and head back to the person who had pushed it. The family could only assume that solar energy was responsible for the sphere's bizarre movements, especially since they realized it moved more intensely when the sun shone bright. At that point, Terry began to conduct his own experiments. When he tried hitting it with a hammer, it would ring loudly. When he shook it, it rolled all around his room. As the fear garnered interest from a wider audience, it also attracted the scientific community. It wasn't long before officials from NASA, the U.S. military, and the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization came to conduct studies. Initial research showed the steel sphere had not been manufactured or tampered with. And here's one of the most interesting parts. When military officials asked the Betts family if they could take the sphere back to their labs to conduct further research, the family declined. By the time it was eventually seized by officials, the family claimed it had begun exhibiting paranormal behavior, like slamming doors without being touched and causing loud organ music to blare throughout their home at night. And here's another really interesting discovery I wanted to share with you guys. I've shown you this a few times in other videos throughout the years. I think it's incredibly important. You'll soon see why. 350 ancient artifacts found in Ecuador, including a pyramid depicting the constellation of Orion. Among the mysterious 350 artifacts, there is one item that has baffled researchers since its discovery. A mysterious stone pyramid about 25 centimeters tall. Among the artifacts discovered, there is another item that challenges archaeologists. A small artifact depicting a royal cobra. The royal cobra is native to the southeastern parts of Asia and cannot be found in South America. And this image here is from a study that they performed on some of these artifacts. they found that when they put a black light on these artifacts, they would actually light up. So even more interesting, on the bottom of this particular pyramid with the eye, you find some strange inscriptions. The translation of the 5 symbols engraved in the base of the pyramid stone reads, "The son of the creator comes from here." This language is so-called pre-Sanskrit, translated by German linguist Kurt Schildmann. According to him, this writing is similar but older than Sanskrit. Until Schildmann saw this in other artifacts, Sanskrit was considered to be the oldest written language. Schildmann named this writing therefore pre-Sanskrit. There are many other stone artifacts with inscriptions in pre-Sanskrit awaiting translation. Below is another transcription from a German website. It reads, "The son, daughter of my creator comes from outside in too." So we covered a lot of information and a lot of different angles on this whole narrative of the alien saviors, or alien contact, or disclosure. This is no longer a fringe topic. We have people in our government actively talking about this now. And as you can see from the video, this is becoming a very mainstream topic. And we know that all the media is controlled, so whenever I see narratives like this coming out, I'm always wondering, what are they preparing us for? There's a reason they're all talking about this. I believe that the end game is the abolition of religion in general, and specifically Christianity. And I do wonder how many people will walk away from any kind of faith once these things are revealed. But I guess we'll have to wait and see. So until next time, thanks as always for watching my video, you guys. Take care of yourselves out there, alright? And I'll talk to you a little later.